Okay, here we are, Toxic Rain Pathfinder. My favorite build. Definitely a build I did not need to play again for the 5 millionth time to be able to talk about it in a lot of detail, but I did it anyway because it's fun and I like it. I thought it was necessary for the purposes of this series that I've been doing, and even though I know it well, I still thought I needed to go through the whole process in order just to, be thorough. Plus, what if I learned something new? And I actually think I have learned something new, so this has definitely been a good use of time. Also on the subject of time, I haven't been fully including a disclaimer in every single one of these videos in this series since, okay, this may be hard to believe, but I actually do try to make these videos not be as long as possible. So with that being said, here goes. I have had a pretty fun time making this series of videos in which I play a variety of popular League Start builds through the campaign and like the early part of mapping. We're talking like just a taste of day one stuff, a sample. It's been a pretty fun little experiment, which I also thought could help with analyzing and responding to the patch notes when they drop later this week, and maybe having a little bit more than just Toxic Rain Pathfinder as like a suggestion for a League Start build. I've had a few people ask why I didn't wait until after the patch notes dropped to do this whole experiment, and I think most people kind of got it and knew, but just to pointedly say it, I cannot stop time. There is 1 week after the patch notes come out until the league starts. I do expect some things to change, and I will respond accordingly, but it's still a good idea to like brush back up on builds that I haven't played in a while, and even if I wanted to wait until patch notes were out, I wouldn't be able to actually play any of the 3.25 versions of the builds because I can't time travel forward until they're actually in the game. I wish that I could. So with all of that being said, I've enjoyed doing this. It turns out I like PoE, who knew? Maybe I'll fit in another build. I would like to play some flavor of Slam build before the league starts, since it really seems like it's going to be a melee-oriented league, but I'm not sure since time unfortunately keeps moving forward at the normal rate. We'll see. Either way, this has been a really good, fun thing to do. And so this is my version of a Toxic Rain Pathfinder League starter, and it is still great, no surprise. This build still rules. I mean, of course, I think it's great. It's my favorite build. We have dedicated more time on this channel to Toxic Rain Pathfinder than any other topic, even including essences. We have a whole playlist of Toxic Rain Pathfinder videos and even a complete gear crafting guide that's like 2 hours long or something. But making this video really helped me remember why I like Toxic Rain so much. It's so fast. The damage is very competitive throughout the campaign, and the quality of life is excellent. So let's take a closer look, but first, we just passed the 9,000 subscriber mark. We are over 9,000, and that's really awesome. Thank you to everyone who's joined us along the way. The next league, I think, is going to be something really special. And so if you like this video, please like it and subscribe if you haven't already. Okay, having made Toxic Rain Pathfinder guides for a little while now, we've gotten a really common handful of questions, so I just wanted to address those like at the very start of the guide here with a section dedicated entirely to answering them. So don't skip this and then ask these questions. Okay, question number 1, how do you automate your life flask? You don't. You cannot automate your life flask in PoE. It is against the terms of service to do anything that would automate Flask being used, and I don't break the terms of service in any games I play. And this isn't like me winking at the camera like, I know. No, I just don't. I don't like breaking the rules. Do not do it. I'm not going to gamble with my account. I have a lot of hours and money into this, and my thumbs are pretty strong. I'm not willing to risk it. I wouldn't even want to risk it. I wouldn't know how to risk it, so that's off the table for me. Question number 2, how do you automate your life flask as a Pathfinder? No, really, just don't. I have strong hands. It's not any more complicated than that. I keybind my life flask to my mouse. That's probably the one really good tip I can give. I have a mouse that lets me set one of my keybinds to 1, which is my like keyboard keybind, and then I can also hit it on my mouse. That's it. That is the main reason I did it. I also did it so that I could like life flask while I'm drinking Diet Dr. Pepper with my left hand, but it makes it easier to hit consistently, and that probably is the biggest downside of any Pathfinder build. You do have to hit your damn life flask every 6 seconds or so for basically the lifespan of the character. All right, I doubled down on the life flask question, so like if you still ask about how to automate it, my channel manager is going to make fun of you for not being able to watch 4 minutes or so into the video. Ask at your own peril. All right, next up, can you make this build work with Mana Forged arrows? This is something that worked prior to 3.24, and then the Mana Flask suffix was nerfed and it became a lot harder. You still can, but it requires a lot of gear and effort. It'll require pretty good rings. It will require quite a few gems. And more or less, it's going to require a Clarity Watcher's Eye, so it really becomes a lot harder to pull it off. And I just don't think it's worth it to try to run this as a Mana Forged Arrows build anymore, certainly not unless you're doing insanely high investment. Is this a 2-button build? It can be. It doesn't have to be a 2-button build. I do think it's stronger if you play it as a 2-button build, since Caustic Arrow is a much stronger and faster clear skill than Toxic Rain, and Toxic Rain is stronger at burning down large, single-target enemies. This is how I leveled it through the campaign this time. I actually used Toxic Rain as a 4-link and Caustic Arrow as a 4-link, once I had them available, that is. And this is the fastest I think I've cleared through the campaign, certainly of all the characters throughout this experiment. I mean, I stopped and probably took notes on all of them except for the Righteous Fire Chieftain, which was actually, I think, maybe the slowest. But this character was definitely the fastest, both because it is fast, but also because I had the two, somewhere between 2 and 4 links working for basically the entire campaign and really just giving a lot more clear speed. And also, you are using a bow and body armor, so you have a pretty easy time of getting to different 6 links. It's kind of just wasting a lot of potential damage to not take full advantage of them. If you want to focus more on bossing, you can use Focus Ballista Totems with Withering support as your second gem setup instead of Caustic Arrow, and that will improve your single target damage by a fair amount. That is the playstyle I've used in past leagues. I really only switched over to using the Caustic Arrow Toxic Rain version in the last 2 leagues, and I was pretty much immediately converted upon doing that. I will not be going back to totems. I really don't like Ballista Totems. I don't like them as Ballista Totem support, where I'm using them in conjunction with also self-casting Toxic Rain, and I really don't like them as the primary driver of the build. Okay, another really common question. How does this compare to the Ballista Totem Toxic Rain build? So this is specifically talking about Palsteron's build that uses Wilma's Requital to massively boost the value of Ballista Totems and then doesn't self-cast Toxic Rain at all. It just uses support skills like Frenzy and Ensnaring Arrow to juice the damage from your totems. So straight up, I do not like attack totems. This is not Palsteron slander. He's great. I like him, and the build is really good. I have played it. It's really good for bossing. But I did not enjoy the mapping playstyle at all, and that is for the same reason that I just hate all attack totems. It's very slow and janky while mapping. The delay on activation for your attack totems feels really strange, and I just don't like the way it handles at all. You have to run into range, drop your totems, move behind them or move around them so that you don't take 10,000 hits to the face while they're starting to activate and clear. Then you keep moving forward and dropping more, and it's just a very weird stop and start play style with a delay that I really don't like at all. It's slow, which does not jive with me at all for playing a Pathfinder. You move quickly as a Pathfinder, and then your clear speed is being held up by these totems. I don't like it. I cannot deny that it is better than self-cast Toxic Rain for bossing. It is better. You can drop the totems and then dodge attacks the whole time. That's really great. But for mapping, I can't stand it, and that's kind of true for all attack totems. It's not just attack totem Toxic Rain, but I don't care for them. I don't really think of this as a value judgment either. It's not that I think that they're bad or evil, it's just a preference. Some people love Swiss cheese, some people love dark chocolate, and some people hate them. I like Swiss cheese, love dark chocolate, and hate attack totems. The only other significant downside to that build is that it relies on Wilma's Requital to really function effectively, which is a unique helmet. It's fairly common, but not insanely common, so obviously if demand for it is high, then the price will also be kind of high, and it is a limitation that you have to farm one up in order to play that build in SSF. And also, if totems do wind up being nerfed for some reason in patch 3.25, then that build may just crash and burn with them. I would not bet on that at all. I don't think that'll happen, but it's within the realm of possibility. Okay, now let's move on to pros and cons, and I'll do the positives first, of course. First of all, this build just has a super fast, smooth playstyle throughout the campaign and throughout the end game. It was the fastest character for clearing the whole campaign by far. Very, very smooth and easy playstyle from start to finish. It also has very easy gear progression. It's completely SSF viable, still a top 10 build in solo self-found hardcore as well, which somehow I wrote that down as SSFGC in my notes. I don't know what GC would be short for. Garden Core, GameCube, Ghost Crawler. You know, leave a comment saying what you think SSFGC should be. New game mode for PoE. It also is a build that has really good damage on a budget, and given that it moves so quickly and has so much quality of life, I think the damage is like really satisfying. It scales into in-game very well with decent investment. I cleared everything in Necropolis League on a Toxic Rain Pathfinder, including Ubers and tier 17s, and that's like pre-nerf tier 17s even. You can go back and look at some of the older videos from the first couple weeks of Necropolis League if you want to see how the build progressed and how the damage worked out. I was very happy with it considering the other positives that the build has. It also has a lot of damage scalers. You have gem levels, you have attack speed, you have skill effect duration, and all the different flavors of damage over time multiplier all really coming together. You also have just very easy mana management with Eldritch Battery. I really hope that's not foreshadowing anything. I did not put that into the bingo board because I don't even want to think about if they were to do anything to EB. It is a very good build at a wide range of league mechanics as well. The only ones I don't think it's great at are Legion, since that really relies on fast screen clear, and this is damage over time and not that screen cleary. And also it's not that great at Sanctum. That's really more of a mechanic for super single target damage, heavy glass cannon builds like Hex Blast Miner, but it's great at Heist. You know, it's great at anything that involves moving fast, and everything in a game like PoE involves moving fast, so it's pretty great at everything. It also has super high quality of life. We're talking 100% utility flask uptime, ailment immunity, stun immunity, super tanky against dot effects, you know, thousands of healing per second, and it can do pretty much all of the map mods. It's just a really great build at all stages of the endgame. And then finally, there is a lot of community support. There are gear crafting guides, including a complete gear crafting progression guide made by me, Larold. And now I want to talk about the downsides. First off, you cannot automate the life flask. That's a downside for all Pathfinder builds. I think I've said enough about it though. There's also the issue of enemies that move around a lot, since you are dropping pods on the ground. If enemies run out of them, that can be pretty annoying. That's not usually a problem for the majority of content, but for like high-end bosses, pinnacle bosses, that can be pretty frustrating. It does have the 2-button-ish playstyle. It's not really a 2-button playstyle. Really, 2-button playstyle is more like cast Desecrate, cast Detonate Dead. That's 2-button playstyle. The old version of Splitting Steel. Cast Splitting Steel for a while, reload with Call of Steel, you know, so on. The playstyle of Toxic Rain, Caustic Arrow is really more that you clear with Caustic Arrow, and then you switch to Toxic Rain, and then you clear with Caustic Arrow, and then you switch to Toxic Rain to burn down a single target guy. It's more like you're swapping back and forth. But with that being said, it literally is 2 different buttons. So, you know, not beating the 2-button build allegations. Also, there is Divine Blessing support as a buff. That is something you will have to maintain. Now, with all of the increased skill effect duration that you get in this build, a Divine Blessing support will last a really long time. It's really not that hard to maintain that buff permanently, and so you're able to get 4 50% auras because of that, and that's pretty good, but it is definitely another thing that you have to maintain along with hitting your life flask. Also, maybe just my least favorite thing about the build is that it's not compatible with Leech. The way that Toxic Rain works, it just doesn't work with Leech at all. It's always something I've disliked about Toxic Rain. It's why fixing mana is so difficult with this build. And then as a sort of evasion-based build that's just, I don't know, very quick and all, it's not very tanky early on. It's not using determination. It doesn't have a high amount of strength. This is something about Palsteron's version of the build that I liked, but ultimately chose not to use. He puts Petrified Blood into his version of the build, and I mean, that is good for reservation. It only costs 35% instead of 50. I think you can use that instead of Grace, or maybe instead of Purity of Elements. It's something you could do. The problem I have with it is just fitting it in. It has a very high strength requirement. Your strength requirement for the build goes from like 90 to 155 or so by putting in that Petrified Blood. And then I don't really love the way that it's constantly going to cost you a lot of life whenever you're above half health. That is definitely annoying for me as well. So that's ultimately why I've never done Petrified Blood as part of this build. It is something you could hypothetically do. It'll make you a little bit tankier, but with all of the kind of downsides that come with Petrified Blood, and also the downsides of not having Haste, Grace, Purity of Elements, and Malevolence as all of your different auras. Now, the positive of this build is that it becomes extremely tanky once you get a Progenesis. I mean, that's true of every build, but it's still very tanky even before that point. Just by getting a Taste of Hate and getting Lightning Coil, you really do a lot to make yourself much more tanky. If you can get a Watcher's Eye that has some Fizz to Ellie conversion, that also is really good. You know, you're able to get a lot of Fizz taken as Ellie in this build, and that is really what you need to be tanky. But prior to that point, it can feel pretty spiky. And then I think finally the last kind of downside is the 37 to 43% AoE requirement, which I'll talk about that a bit more in detail later on, but you have to get AoE on 2 pieces of gear. You usually go with that as either like gloves, that's pretty much locked in, and then either helmet or amulet as your other piece, but it does just create a little bit of a strict requirement on gearing that's not necessarily there for a lot of other builds. Okay, let's talk about what makes the build work. And just to kind of show off the skill, when you shoot out Toxic Rain, as you can see, it fires an arrow up in the ground, and then that arrow splits into 5 pods. And when these pods hit the ground, they attach vines to nearby enemies and deal damage over time for a while, and then the pods explode. The explosion damage is minimal. It does very little, except in the first couple of levels that you have the skill. It's all about those vines. You want to fire out as many Toxic Rain pods as you can into enemies so that they get shredded by the vines. Now, because of this, Toxic Rain is a skill that scales with gem levels, attack speed, dot multi, and skill effect duration, but it doesn't really scale with weapon damage at all. So you effectively build this like a caster, but with a lot of the advantages of being an attack build as well. There is more, of course. Toxic Rain's pods do not totally overlap by default. As you can see, they're spread out somewhat. As you get more increased area of effect, the range at which the vines will attach to enemies increases, but they also spread out further. So you don't want to just jack a bunch of AoE into the build, like just jack it to the moon. You also don't want to add more projectiles because that'll cause them to spread out even further. There is a sweet spot of 37 to 43% increased AoE that will make all 5 of the Toxic Rain pods from your shot overlap into the majority of normal-sized enemies, hitting them with all 5 pods worth of vines, and that is critical for maximizing your single target damage. By having the right amount of area of effect, you increase your single target damage by roughly 25 to 65%, and I mean, obviously that's pretty huge. Now, during the campaign, this doesn't matter. You have enough damage in the campaign to just get by with like what you get out of passives in the skill or the passive tree, but this is a major point of emphasis early on into the end game since it is worth so much damage, and it is a big reason, since these are veiled mods, it is a big reason why I like to kind of rush Betrayal as one of my first league mechanics when I am playing Toxic Rain, which I'm always playing Toxic Rain at league start, so I guess I always rush Betrayal. Now, thankfully, it's not that difficult to get that much AoE. You know, you get 20% from this bow mastery right here, which you can pick up in like Act 2 or 3. That pretty much takes care of that. And then the other 20% comes from Betrayal modifiers, as I mentioned already, that you can craft on your gloves, helm, or amulet. And you want 2 crafted AoE mods and the 20% from the tree. And that'll put you right in the range. Somewhere between 37 and 43%, you're good to go. You can also get increased AoE from Corrupted Gem implicit modifiers or Corrupted Belt implicit modifiers, but that's a bit more of an in-game optimization, and yeah, definitely not something you need to worry about at league start. Now, this is how we deal single target damage, but what about clear? So for clear, we have Caustic Arrow, and Caustic Arrow is a much simpler skill. I'm going to go to the Blood Aqueducts and show off Caustic Arrow a bit. When it hits an enemy, it drops a pool of chaos damage on the ground. The pools, as you can see here, the pools, they look like this, and they do more damage than a single shot of Toxic Rain, like a lot more. The problem with them is that they don't stack. So if I do this for a while, I shoot out a ton of Caustic Arrow pools on the ground. If an enemy's standing in 3 of them, they're only standing in 1. And that is the issue here. So you can use Caustic Arrow to clear out packs of trash mobs, and it's really good at doing this. It kills stuff really fast, and it has so much damage that you can even afford to use Arrow Nova support on it so that the clear is screen wide. Now, this isn't something that I would necessarily do during the campaign or even like immediately after finishing, even though I am, as you can see, literally doing that right now. It's definitely taking these guys down, but Arrow Nova support has a pretty strong less damage multiplier on it. And so that is really something you can kind of like, if we were to show off without Arrow Nova support, you could see the damage is quite significant. It is just shredding these guys with a single shot, even though my gear is truly, truly awful. Like, you know, the only modifier on this bow that does anything is the attack speed. A lot of this stuff is like very, very bad gear, which is fine. I mean, that's what you would expect at the end of the campaign. But you can see the difference. So I wouldn't necessarily run Arrow Nova support on Caustic Arrow during the campaign, but as soon as I've finished, gotten even just a little bit into progressing the character into the end game, I would switch over and use that, because it really helps with the clear. Now, another thing, as you can kind of see throughout this footage here, is that if Caustic Arrow pierces through an enemy, it will drop a pool and keep going. And so you can use Pierce support, or you can use the Pierce implicit, Eldritch implicit on gloves to really increase the screen clearing potential. You can see like a lot of stuff here. I have Pierce support linked in here. If I just take this out, I'm just gonna shoot through a pack of dude. Well, I'm gonna miss is what I meant to say. You can see it dropped pools here and then continued through. So this makes it really easy to clear out big packs of enemies just by shooting out like one Caustic Arrow. And that's really good throughout the campaign, really good throughout mapping. All right, now let's talk about what makes the build special. Speed. In a word, speed. Toxic Rain Pathfinder has a lot going for it. It genuinely is a fantastic all-around build. It's a well-rounded beast. This is a build that can do everything and do it all really well, but it really just separates itself from the rest of the pack when it comes to doing mechanics that involve going fast. Heist, for example. Everyone loves doing heist at the start of a league, but Toxic Rain Pathfinder does it faster. She's not like other girls. She's extremely smooth and zoomy, while also pretty good at every other aspect of the game as well. I have played Toxic Rain Pathfinder as a league starter for more leagues than I can count. I've played it and then moved on quickly. I've played it through all of the endgame and then made other builds. I've played it as my only build of the league. It can do all of those. It's good for everything. It's flexible and strong, but most of all, it's just really fast. All right, another good strength of the build is the lack of mandatory uniques. I'm going to show off some good optional uniques. Quill Rain is my favorite unique in the game. I kind of bounce back and forth between this and Mahak-Sodal's Machination, but right now Quill Rain is back to being my favorite. When what are they called? Reliquary keys. When we had the opportunity to put uniques into reliquary keys, I did put a Quill Rain in because I like it so much. It's a great Toxic Rain bow, and it's definitely something that you'll want to try to get, you know, if you can get one during the campaign. If you're lucky and you get one during the campaign, that's awesome. I think my first character in this series, the Bone Zone Jug, got one of these in like the first act, and I just went like, cool. Well, that could have been saved until next league start. Oh well, it is what it is. You know, it's not mandatory by any stretch, and they're usually very cheap, but yeah, you can use one of these, buy one of these as you kind of get out of the campaign for a few chaos, and rock with this through heist and like white maps, and that'll keep you rocking until you're able to kind of get yourself a porcupine go, get set up for more success down the line. The next unique is Lightning Coil. This is your in-game BIS chest piece. It converts 50% of fizz taken into lightning. It's massive for damage reduction for staying alive. It also gives you a lot of evasion rating, which is cool. The armor is whatever. The lightning damage is irrelevant. The life is good. The minus 60 lightning res is tough. It's something you'll have to overcome. You can do that by just using a topaz flask, since it's so easy to get 100% uptime on flasks. You're able to just get, like, you're actually kind of able to get it from both ends. I think I mentioned this later in the flask section, but I'll just say it now. Like, by running a topaz flask, you're able to fix the lightning resistance minus it comes from this unique, but then also give yourself a much higher max res that then makes this unique a lot more powerful. Okay, next is the Devouring Diadem. This is an energy shield helmet. It comes from Katarina, the final boss of Betrayal. Spoilers for Betrayal. And it's just really strong. It gives you Eldritch Battery, so that saves you several points. It gives you a massive amount of energy shield, which helps make Eldritch Battery work a lot better. It also gives you a ton of reservation efficiency and level to socketed gems. So this makes it so that you can just use like a level 3 Enlighten, and that'll count as a level 4. Link that up with the rest of your reservation skills, and you can easily run 3 50% reservation skills just with this helmet. It really, really becomes easy. And then also, I think level 15 Feast of Flesh is super, super underrated. As you can see here, when it triggers, it it gobbles up corpses nearby and restores life, mana, and ES for each corpse consumed. This helps a ton with sustain for ES while mapping, but also it just gives you a ton of life. Like the amount of times where I've been low, gotten smacked by something and my health drops, and then Feast of Flesh triggers, and then boom, I'm instantly back to full before I even realize what happened. It's happened so many times. So amazing, amazing helm. Super undervalued, and it's usually, you know, depending on when you try to buy one in Trade League, the price can go up and down, but I think with people realizing how valuable Betrayal can be, I would imagine that the supply of these will be relatively decent in the coming league, and since you probably are going to want to play Betrayal anyway to get yourself some good Veiled mods, you might as well just play it all the way through to the end, get yourself a Devouring Diadem. So, great helm, real like build enabling helm, but not mandatory by any stretch, and solo self-farm a bowl as well. Okay, next is Taste of Hate. It kind of fills a similar role as a lightning coil, but without the horrible downside. It just gives you a bunch of fizz taken as cold. It also gives you cold res and more max cold res, so that's pretty cool, and that's really all that there is to it. Just a super, super tanky flask to run in addition to that lightning coil and topaz flask combo. And then the Tides of Time. This has quickly become one of my new favorite uniques as well. It comes from the Uber Shaper, so it's definitely not something you're going to have on like day one of a league realistically, but it just does kind of everything. I really think that this belt is actually better than Mage Blood, like across the board. I would say that this belt does way more than Mage Blood. The only real downside to it is I think that Vanguard belt implicit kind of stinks. But it has like 100% increased life recovery from flasks is crazy. Like if I show off my level 100 version of the build from this last league, if I take this off, if we look right now, my life recovery is like 2,700 a second. If I drop the belt, it goes down by, let's just drop the belt for nothing, I guess. Yeah, I mean 1,400 a second instead. Like that's brutal. So, you know, pretty huge difference there. And then also the bigger issue, of course, the bigger value is that it gives you life and utility flask charges every 3 seconds, so it makes it very easy to have 100% uptime on all of your flasks. And then 25% increased flask effect that applies to uniques, so it applies to Progenesis, it applies to Taste of Hate. Absolutely, absolutely insane for increasing your defensive value. You know, you look at, like, if I take this off, I lose 18% Fizz max hit, LE max hit. Like, that's crazy how much value that it adds. It also adds a ton of move speed as well, and attack speed from your Silver and Quicksilver flask. I should point that out as well. You know, it's like 3% more damage or something. That's whatever, but like 20% more move speed. You know, that's also pretty good. And then finally, Progenesis. You know, it's Progenesis. It gives you stagger, basically staggers damage, and then all of your sources of increased flask effect, including Tides of Time, apply to this value, the 25% of life lost from damage occurring over 4 seconds instead. It just makes you so tanky. It does interact with Petrified Blood. It is something you can combine. It is something I did combine on the Forbidden Right Pathfinder, which is like, hypothetically, that is a build you could transition out of this into that. But, you know, anyways, like, ultimately, this is just super, super tanky. You know, definitely the chase unique of this build. Now, there are a couple of other things as well that you can think about, like Watcher's Eyes and Unnatural Instinct, or Forbidden Flesh and Forbidden Flame. Lots of stuff that you can build into long term if you want, very like high end stuff. And I will put in addition to the like League Start POB, which I have updated, I will also put in my level 100 POB from Necropolis League, just kind of to show that off. Be something to look at, think about aspirationally as going into the next league. And with that said, I guess I'll go ahead and just jump right into the POB. So I have made, and I made this in the last league, I've made some small updates to it. There isn't a massive amount of stuff that needs to be updated, but I have a POB here. It has very detailed steps from Act 1 all the way through Act 10. It has, you know, early mapping in-game with no cluster jewels, and it kind of walks you through getting 1 cluster jewel, getting 2. At the time that I made this, playing a Mage Blood setup, you know, Tides of Time hadn't been announced. using mana forged arrows, and all of that was still like very much on the table at the time I made this. And personally, I haven't played that playstyle since then. For me, that playstyle is kind of dead, but there are still people who like it. So I have kept that in just to kind of support those people because, you know, I don't want to like give them nothing to aspire to. But for me, I've kind of moved on from that, and I really just prefer the sort of Eldritch Battery playstyle. Devouring Diadem is kind of the last helm I ever need, but I have, you know, I've set up a bunch of steps here in terms of like gearing process as well, and also skills. So let's kind of just walk through this very briefly here. You start out, you want to come out just right through the top side of things and come down and take Primal Spirit as the first notable in this set of 3 notables here that you want to jump to. And this is because it makes it so that you just regenerate a ton of mana when you hit enemies after you've used a mana flask. It makes it so that you're able to sustain mana much, much more easily in the first 4 acts or so, 4 or 5 acts before you drop your mana flask. This is really doing a lot of heavy lifting, making it so that it's very easy to sustain mana. Then the other 2, Aspect of the Eagle and Heart of Oak, those are just really good. I go for Aspect of the Eagle first, so I have just enough damage to kill Brutus super easily and just kind of get through the act quickly. And then I make my way up. I haven't made a ton of huge changes, I would say, going through and playing through. The main things that I've kind of emphasized is just like taking this bow mastery a little bit sooner, taking this damage over time mastery a little sooner, and you're pretty much just trying to progress up in the direction of Eldritch Battery. But as I said in the Hexblast Minor video, you know, just making a straight beeline to Eldritch Battery at like, you know, breakneck speed is kind of pointless because you do need enough energy shield to actually be able to support it, and also in the first like 4 or 5 acts, you don't really have great flask alternatives to a mana flask anyway, so there's not like a huge incentive to get there before about Act 5, but then once you are able to in Act 5, you want to zip right up there, and then once you've done that, then I like to take this Instinct Wheel and get Spell Suppression, lucky chance to Spell Suppression Mastery there as well, just to give myself a lot more defenses against spells throughout the rest of the campaign, and also just like, you know, energy shield sustain so that solves mana. And then right around that point is when I start kind of trying to transition out of using a mana flask and into using like a full range of cool, good, normal flasks instead. Usually just a lot of Quicksilver flasks until around like Act 7 or 8, you know, once you do your second Ascendancy and you're able to really sustain your flasks. And then the rest of the build kind of takes shape once you get through Act 5. You start, you know, you take up like Charisma, and you're just taking a lot more of these nodes here. You finally get a Life Mastery, give yourself some increased maximum life. And then in Act 10, I like to come take this Flask Mastery after I've done my 3rd Ascendancy, and get this Flask Mastery that gives you life whenever you use a flask, because you're popping flasks fairly often. This really does wind up giving you a lot of life back over time. And so that's pretty much the progression of the build through acts and into the end game. Now I want to take a look at skills, and I have made a little bit of a change here throughout the course of the campaign. I found this to be really helpful. So you start out using Caustic Arrow as soon as you kill Hillock and go into town. You talk to Tarklade, he'll give you Caustic Arrow. You want to link that up with Pierce as soon as you get it at level 4. And then once you're in a 3 link, you can use Void Manipulation. That's really good as well. You will get Puncture as a quest reward along the way. You want to pick that up. You can use that in a 1 link. You basically only want to use it to kill Brutus. You can use it to kill the Granddaddy Crab. That's really all it's for. Once you kill Brutus, you can just throw Puncture away. You don't need it anymore. You'll get Dash. You'll use that for a while. You'll get Blink Arrow and Withering Step. Now, you have a choice with Withering Step and Dash. They share a cooldown. I kind of like Withering Step more. It gives you more move speed over the course of time. So you can just drop drop Dash and use Withering Step exclusively in its place once you get it, or you can use both. Really, it's up to you. I would say that much more than stats, I would say that your gearing choices throughout a lot of the campaign are going to be dictated by socket colors. That's certainly how it was for me. And so, you know, basically up until level 12, you're just going to be rocking with Caustic Arrow and like Blink Arrow and Dash or Withering Step. And then once you hit level 12, you get Toxic Rain. And that is when Mirage Archer really comes into the play, because you'll get Mirage Archer, you can hang on to that. It's not useful with Caustic Arrow because Caustic Arrow, having 5 Caustic Arrow pools on the ground, does the same amount of damage as 1. So Mirage Archer basically doesn't do anything with CA, but it adds a lot of damage with Toxic Rain. So I like to use both Toxic Rain and Caustic Arrow. Definitely for killing Merveil, it's really helpful for that. You can continue to use Caustic Arrow for the entire campaign. That is actually what I did this time around. I would use CA. I wasn't using Arrow Nova support. I was just using like Caustic Arrow Pierce, and then once I had a 3-link for it, CA Pierce and Void Manipulation. And then once I had a 4-link for it, I was using Vicious Proj, which I'll actually type this in here. There's no way that you're going to have multiple 6-links during the campaign, so, you know, don't have to worry about whatever else would go in there, but this is basically the setup I was using for the campaign. And then I wouldn't switch over to using the Arrow Nova support because it has that big negative damage multiplier. I wouldn't go like into using that until basically after the campaign is done. But it's up to you, you know. You can use it earlier on if you want for more like screen clear but less damage. It's definitely an option. I would not go that route. So you get Toxic Rain at level 12 as you're going to fight Merveil. You have that, you have Caustic Arrow. You can continue to use those for however long suits you, potentially just the entire lifespan of the character, that's fine. And then once you get into Act 3, I really do think it's worth it to go do the library. You get Dash. Well, you get to replace Dash with Flame Dash, I should say. You can also get like automation support. I think you can get that from whatever her name is in Act 3 town, though. You can link that up with Withering Step. That's pretty nice. And, you know, in Act 3, you start getting your auras. I like to pick up Haste, Malevolence, Grace, and Purity of Elements. I like to pick up all 4 of those. I will level Purity of Elements in the offhand, and then I'll kind of play around with 2 auras. I'll basically use Haste for moving through the campaign, and then whenever I get to a boss, I'll turn it off and turn on Malevolence and use that instead for a little bit more single target damage. If you're worried about defenses at all, you can use Grace instead of either of the 2 auras. That's up to you. But I would say, generally speaking, Haste is the go-to for me throughout most of the campaign. And until you hit, I think it's like Act 6 or so, when you're able to pick up this wheel here, Charisma, I'm just using 1 aura the whole time. Once you get Eldritch Battery, I think that's when you can really turn on your second aura. Depending on how much of energy shield you have, you can turn on your second aura maybe. But, you know, if not, you can wait until you've picked up Charisma along with Eldritch Battery, and then you'll definitely be able to do that, and you can rock with Haste, and then I like basically Haste and Grace if you are worried about getting hit by enemies and killed. Haste and Purity of Elements if you're having trouble with your elemental resistances. That's what I use for the majority of the campaign this time. And then Haste and Malevolence if you just want to maximize your damage, kill bosses as fast as possible. One other thing I wanted to mention before I moved on from this like leveling campaign page here is that efficacy is a really good link to go into your main skill link, but unfortunately you're not able to get it until you do Act 3 and do the library. So that is another justification for doing the library, even if you didn't care about getting Flame Dash. Getting efficacy, if you get unlucky and you can't get a 4 green link to run Toxic Rain, Mirage Archer, Void Manipulate, and Vicious Projectiles. You know, if you're not able to pull that off and you're stuck with, like I was, a 3 green and 1 blue, efficacy would be the ideal blue slot, but because you're not able to get that until you do the library, it's a really good justification for getting in there, reading those stupid books, doing the library. Okay, now here I have sort of the early in-game, early mapping section of the skills set up here, and I would say that Toxic Rain is kind of your main setup, your main 4, 5, or 6 link. That's going to be kind of the go-to. You can use Damage on Full Life or Empower as your red gem socket. Damage on Full Life is not great on its own, but if you get it, what you can do is, instead of using the plus 50 to maximum life mastery, you can use the you count as on full life while at 90% of maximum life or above, and that'll work really well. That'll make that into a pretty valuable offensive gem initially. It does have a higher strength requirement than basically anything else in the build, so, you know, it's not something you're going to use long term. You're just going to use it until you're able to get an Empower gem. As for your kind of clear setup, you can use Caustic Arrow. That's really good for clearing. You know, Caustic Arrow, Vol Caustic Arrow. This is really good. Vicious Barrage, Void Manipulation, Arrow Nova. These are great. And then ultimately, like just to kind of look in game here, you're going to want to add, you know, stuff like Swift Affliction and Empower support to that as well. And I guess I can just go ahead and throw those in here. Swift Affliction. And the reason you would want Swift Affliction is pretty simple. It doesn't matter that the duration is shorter, it just does more damage, you know, more quickly, and that's really all that you want out of that. And then Empower for the exact same reason that Empower is good for Toxic Rain. Getting more levels on your Caustic Arrow makes it do more damage. The end. Now you have two main movement skills, Blink Arrow and Flame Dash. You don't have to use Blink Arrow, it's just an option. And then you have like a fair amount of automated utility here. You can automate Withering Step, you can automate with Immortal Call. I like automation a lot more than cast on damage taken or manually casting either of these, so that works pretty well. You also have Despair, just a very basic Despair curse. You use it on big enemies to lower their chaos res, make you do a lot more damage. And then you have your options of auras, just like you did during the campaign. You're going to have some combination of Purity of Elements, Grace, Haste, Summon Skitterbots. Depending on what your resistances are, you may or may not need Purity of Elements to cap your reses early on in mapping. Grace is just really good for like not getting beaten to death by packs of enemies. And then Summon Skitterbots isn't really all that great, but it is an aura you can use early on just for like a little bit of a damage bonus when you don't have the reservation efficiency yet to be able to afford all of your really good 50% auras. Haste is really good just for adding more damage. You can also use a Divine Blessing, Inspiration support with Malevolence. Use that, keep that up all the time, give yourself a lot more damage. You will need a fair amount of energy shield to be able to afford this, so you will need to bear that in mind as you're gearing. The more you level up Divine Blessing, the more the mana cost will go up, so you can use a level 1 Divine Blessing if you really need to. It won't last nearly as long. Like if we look, 10.9 seconds for the max level Divine Blessing, 9 seconds for the level 1. It also has increased aura effect as you level it up more. So ultimately you'll want to level it up more, and the strength requirements are very low. You'll just need to get your energy shield up to be able to account for that. The reason we link inspiration to it is very simple. As you can see, the top line there, reduced mana cost, that is the extent of it. It just makes it cost a lot less. And then finally you have Blood Rage. I'll also add that there is this Toxic Rain Ballista support setup that I have disabled. It is something you can use if you're going to try and boss. You can use this instead of a Caustic Arrow setup. I prefer Caustic Arrow. I like keeping Caustic Arrow active underneath bosses while I'm fighting them. But, you know, it is an option if you really like this playstyle. You're certainly allowed to do it. I just think most people don't really like the Toxic Rain Ballistas, like maintaining the Ballistas down, using them for support. The goal with this really is just to get like more support out of them. And yeah, I'm just not a huge fan of them, but it is something you can do. I've done it in the past. It worked okay. Just not as good for, I don't know, the majority of the play of the build where you're like clearing, moving quickly with Caustic Arrow. Then I have this next setup here, this No Awaken Gym kind of in-game setup where Toxic Rain, Caustic Arrow, Purity of Elements, Haste, Grace, you know, all set up, Withering Step, Automation, Immortal Call, all just kind of set up like usual. One thing to be aware of, one thing to be like cognizant of is you don't have to max your Immortal Call. It's up to you, base it kind of off of what your strength level is, and the same goes for Flame Dash. You don't have to maximize Flame Dash. You can just base that off of how much strength you have. And if you only have enough strength to use like a level 1 or 5 or whatever Immortal Call or Flame Dash or whatever, that is fine. You probably will be fine on Int, but strength, you know, you're usually going to be a little bit on the lower side, and that's okay. Other than that, I think it's all pretty much business as usual in this kind of pre-Awakened Gym in-game setup here. I think the only other thing I would maybe point out is just like, if you're able to fit in Defiance Banner, that's cool. Definitely gives you just more evasion rating, reduced crit chance for nearby enemies, just, you know, adds a lot more defensive value. Not something you have to prioritize, but definitely something that is cool to fit in, and especially if you're using Devouring Diadem and you have a lot of reservation efficiency, maybe you can fit it in, and, you know, pretty cool if you can. And then beyond that, really like the final in-game stage of the build is just going for that level 4 Empower. It will add a lot of damage, going for Awakened Gems, going for Awakened Gems on your Caustic Arrow setup as well. Pretty much all the stuff you would expect, just trying to really maximize every single bit of power that you can possibly get out of the build by adding more powerful gems into it. You definitely don't need Awakened Gems to be able to clear a lot of content, but it does help. It makes you, it makes you do more damage, and that's pretty good. Awakened Arrow Nova in particular is one that I just really like. It adds an extra projectile that's fired out of the Arrow Nova. It also, reduces that damage reduction, that less projectile damage component even further, so that's good. We're really just getting that extra projectile, more coverage, but you definitely don't need it. I've done plenty of in-game content without Awakened Gems, and it works okay. All right, that's probably enough about skills. Let's go ahead and talk about the Ascendancy, and I'll just kind of walk through how we progress through it. Taking Nature's Reprisal as your first Ascendancy node is kind of a no-brainer. It gives you a pretty good chance to trigger Withered when you hit enemies, 25%. You're able to hit 15 stacks of Withered once you kind of get to the end game, get the build fully online. You're very easily able to maintain 15 stacks of Withered on most enemies, and that's great. Normally 15 Withered stacks is 90% increased chaos damage taken, which is huge. That's basically 90% more damage, close to double damage. But because of that second line, 50% increased effective Withered, it becomes 9% per stack. So that's, what is that, 135% increased damage taken? So 45% more damage taken out of this node. That's pretty huge, while also solving the issue of having to apply Wither either through like totems or withering support or something. So just really, really awesome node, and definitely something you want to take right off the bat, because even though this is a build that's about flasks, the flasks that you have available initially really, like, it's just Life and Mana Flask and Quicksilver Flask, not actually that valuable. Getting a pretty substantial increase to your damage through the campaign is a lot more useful. At level 55 or so, when you do the Cruel Lab, that is when you're going to want to pick up Nature's Adrenaline, and around this point, really in the run up to this point, is when you're going to want to be looking for for good flasks, Jade Flask, Quicksilver Flask, Silver Flask, Quicksilver Flask, all that stuff, and you're really going to be able to take advantage of this from that point onward. I wouldn't start with this, though. I think that getting the Flask uptime doesn't really do that much for you from like Acts 3 to Act 6. And then in Act 10, I like to take Master Surgeon. This allows you to have permanent Flask uptime, Life Flask uptime. You'll kind of need some passives along the way elsewhere in the tree to really make that like kind of be locked in, but this is the thing that makes the build work so well, makes you so incredibly tanky, and as you can see by turning it off, it massively cuts the amount of life regen that you're able to sustain, really like the thing that ties the whole build together. And then finally, Nature's Boon just makes it so that you get a massive amount of increased effect on magic utility flasks, which is super, super strong. Alright, so now that we've covered the core components of the build, let's talk about flasks. Since this is a Pathfinder build, flasks are immensely important. They basically are what your Ascendancy is. Throughout the campaign, especially the first half of the campaign, you're mainly just going to be using regular Life and Mana Flasks and then some Quicksilver Flasks, hopefully 2 or 3. You will phase out the Mana Flask once you pick up Eldritch Battery, and just as kind of a quick aside about that, I've already mentioned, but you really do want to make sure that you get a few pieces of Energy Shield gear along the way. That really helps. Once you have the second lab done and your flasks become a much bigger deal, you really want to have a Life Flask, a Silver Flask, a Quicksilver Flask, and then ideally a Jade Flask and a Quartz Flask. You can rock with that combination well into mapping, and I'll just pull those out here out of my stash. Jade, Quartz, Silver, and Quicksilver, something like this, along with whatever Life Flask you have. That'll really work. You can do that for the entire back half of the campaign. That is what I did on this character, and you want to go with that until you're able to get a Taste of Hate, which I don't know if I have any Taste of Hate in my... Oh yeah, of course I have Taste of Hate in my stash. Ideally, you'll swap the Taste of Hate in place of the Quartz Flask. I mean, I like Quartz. It gives you phasing. It gives you some spell suppress. That'll be worth quite a bit of spell suppression, given that you're getting a lot of Flask effect. But ultimately, you're going to get suppress from from gear, and that kind of rules out the need to devote an entire flask slot to it, and having that Taste of Hate really winds up being a lot better. Once you get a lightning coil, a topaz flask, as I already mentioned, really helps out a ton with offsetting the downside of that chest piece, and I usually do swap it in favor of that jade flask. And it increases the value of the fizz to lightning conversion by boosting your max lightning res by like somewhere in the range of like 7 to 9% as well. Something that you can do, especially once you have the Tides of Time giving you a lot of utility flask charges. You're able to sustain the Topaz Flask so much to the point that you can actually run increased effect, reduced duration as a prefix. You will want to like check this in your PoB and make sure that you're still getting 100% uptime, but it's definitely something that you can do, and I really like doing that. It pushes you more into the like 9% more max lightning res range, which is really awesome. As for automating your flasks, your utility flask you can do that with, and I just like to use when charges reach full. You can just bench craft that on. It takes, what does it take? It takes a handful of, I think these are instilling orbs. I can never remember the types of orbs. I think it's instilling orbs and obviously glass blowers, baubles, and then yeah, instilling orbs. Okay. And that's all that it really takes to like automate your flasks. And then you have two options. You can do use when charges reach full, which is actually less uptime, but it's the one I prefer because it's just like you never have to touch them. They just automate themselves for the lifetime of the character, basically. The alternative is use when flask runs out. What is the exact terminology here? Use at the end of the flask. So that means that every time you enter a map, you would have to go 2, 3, 4, 5, or whatever your keybinds are, and then as long as you map through and you don't die, they will stay up, and you will technically get a little bit more uptime because they won't ever reapply them early. But it's kind of annoying, and I don't really love it. One thing I did not make a note for was cluster jewels. I didn't talk about those at all. I have notes about them. I've talked about them in the past, but I have notes about them in the PoB. But one thing I do want to mention just before I move off of this, since we are talking about flasks, is the flask effect duration medium cluster jewel. This is something you're going to want to have in your build as soon as you're able to get it because of this specific node, Spiked Concoction. Brewed for Potency is good. It's fine. There are several decent other options, but Spiked Concoction in particular, because you get Alchemist Genius when you use a flask, it gives you 4 seconds of increased flask charge generation and increased flask effect. This is something you really want to have in every version of the build. Kind of want to have it in all Pathfinder builds. It makes it, especially in conjunction with hitting your life flask every somewhere in the range of like 4 to 6 seconds. It makes it so that you basically just have permanent 20% flask charge generation and 10% flask effect, and that really, really all works together nicely, and it helps a lot with flask sustain. Okay, so now let's talk about how to roll flasks, and life flasks are pretty much set in stone. You want a divine life flask, not an eternal flask, because the life flask, the divine life flask lasts a lot longer than an eternal flask, and that's actually good and important. You want to have a longer duration so you have full uptime. And on that subject, you want your prefix to look like this one. It doesn't have to be tier 1, but increased amount recovered, reduced recovery rate, that's actually good, and like both of those modifiers are good. It gives you more life per flask use, and it makes it last longer to apply all that healing. This is ideal because it improves the uptime on the flask and makes it just very easy to hit 100% uptime, which is what you want. It also means less hitting your life flask, so, like less work, good for your wrists. For the suffix, you're gonna want Bleed and Corrupted Blood immunity. It's just really good, and this is the best place to get it. As for your utility flasks, for the magic ones, the best prefix possible is this one right here, Increased Charge Recovery. It doesn't have to be a tier 1 roll for anything other than the silver flask. Silver flasks have a much higher charge consumption, 40 of 60 on use as opposed to 30 of 60 on use for most of the utility flasks, and I think some of them maybe even use less, like some of the elemental resistance flasks. If I can pull up like a topaz here, I guess that's reduced charges per use. Oh, so's that one. Oh, great. They're all reduced charges per use. 20 out of 50. So since you're regenerating a lot of charges over time, the topaz, sapphire, ruby flasks, those can be pretty easy to maintain. But, silver can be a little bit more difficult, so it's a little bit less forgiving. Increased charge recovery is the best. Increased flask duration, reduced charges used are both decent prefixes. They're not as good, not bad. Depends on the flask you're using, the rest of your build. You'll want to check it in PoB to see what your uptime will be. For utility flask suffixes, this is where you get to mix and match a bit. You want increased attack speed on one of your flasks. It's important for damage, but not for staying alive, so it tends to be one that you kind of want to, if you're going to have uptime drop, it's best for this to probably be the thing that drops. So I like to have it on the silver flask if I can dictate that. And then after that, chance to avoid being stunned is really my preferred suffix. Like, I like to have that. I never want to be stunned and just like chain stunned down. Other than those, you can get reduced effective curses, and I think I had that on a flask here. Reduced, well, you know, that's fine. Anyways, here we go. Perfect. Reduced effective curses could be really nice. Quality of life, reduced chance to avoid being stunned, I've already mentioned. I really like that. Evasion rating, this is another one that can be really good. Curse immunity can be really good. I like curse immunity a lot personally, and so, you know, my ideal setup when I'm using like 4 would be basically chance to avoid being stunned, reduce effective curses, attack speed, of course, and then probably evasion rating. And then I would drop the evasion rating first, and then I would drop the curses, and then that would leave me with attack speed and chance to avoid being stunned as kind of my ultimate in-game setup. All right, so now to rank this on the scale of fun to not fun. Which way do you think I'm gonna lean? Yeah, of course, this build is super fun. It's fun, it's fast. Fast is fun. They start with the same letter. Coincidence? I think not. It moves quickly, it's super forgiving. The damage is extremely good throughout the campaign, and even into early mapping when you're on a super budget, you really don't stall like some other builds can. You're not relying on uniques to get over a hump, which is really good for like profitability and keeping costs low. You have a clear, steady gear progression path the entire time. It's pretty great. So yeah, ultimately S tier fun level of build. It moves super fast. It has permanent flask uptime. What more could you really ask for? Boss annihilating single target damage, I guess that would be great, but Toxic Rain Pathfinder has everything I need to enjoy a league start, especially if it's not a bossing league, and I don't know what Settler League has in store for us, but my guess would be more of a map clearing league with some kind of in-game meta progression that involves gathering boat parts to craft boats, I guess. And Toxic Rain's ability to zoom through maps at lightning speed is going to be very strong for a league mechanic like that. Now, I mentioned earlier on that I made a gear crafting guide video for Toxic Rain Pathfinder, and I will link that in the description of this video. It's very long and detailed, piece by piece, and intended to be a resource that you can kind of follow along with and check back on as you progress your character, rather than something you just like sit and watch for fun. You know, I did make it during the run-up to Necropolis League, so I would say that the only components of it that I think haven't aged super well are that the Veiled Mana Cost Flask suffix was removed, and that really hurt the ability to play a Mana Forged Arrows version of Toxic Rain. And then I was using Veiled Chaos Orbs in that build, or in that video, to finish crafting some of the super in-game items. The removal of the reduced mana cost crafted flask suffix is what it is. We've adjusted, it's fine. Now, depending on whether the drop rate of Veiled Orbs gets buffed in 3.25 or not, that may become a viable alternative again for crafting in-game items. But, you know, you can also just settle for slightly less high-end items, like just to look at the build that this character that I did at tier 17s and Uber bosses on. I just have a crafted Veiled modifier instead of using orbs to get it, and it was totally fine. I will update that video at some point, but it is very long and detailed, and it took a really long time to make. And the overwhelming majority of the information in it is still completely accurate. So I think I would rather do that when there's a more significant need for a huge update. You know, like right now, the most important things: crafting your in-game bow, crafting your in-game quiver, crafting your in-game amulet, crafting a lot of, pretty much all of the in-game pieces, crafting a Despair on hit ring. All of the really like critical stuff is correct. So I would rather kind of spend the time required to update that, the like week of time it took to make. You know, if the patch 3.25 notes come along and flip the game on its head and it's mandatory, then I'll guess I'll do it this week. But if things are mostly business as usual for Toxic Rain, I'll focus on other stuff like making more resources for having a good league start and just kind of tweaking the build as required. based on what changes in the coming league. Okay, let's wrap things up. This was my favorite build of the bunch. No real surprises there. They all have their strengths and weaknesses, and I think if I had to pick the reason I like Toxic Rain Pathfinder the most, it's that it's super fast. But then, kind of number two is that it had the least problematic weaknesses of the bunch, and I really know the progression into the end game and I really enjoy it. The only real noteworthy issue with Pathfinder is the life flask maintenance, and that's just really not a problem for me. My hands are very strong. As for whether I will once again play this as my league starter or if I will succumb to the temptation of Melee League, I don't know. I'm gonna have to see the patch notes, I'm gonna have to see the reveal and make my decision at that point, or at some point between then and the league start. I will of course look for changes that affect this build and update accordingly once the time comes. Until then, have fun playing Toxic Rain Pathfinder and getting excited about Settler League. Alright, that's it. Thanks for watching. Bye.